Welcome to another episode of Mike's Money Picks. Today on the podcast, week one in college football continues with the Friday night slate. That is what we're going to be talking here on this episode. I'm recording this sitting here on Thursday night while all these games are going on. But, we got the Friday night slate coming up. I've already recorded the episode for the Saturday main slate, so go check that out if you've not already. And I plan on hitting the Saturday night slate tomorrow night. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel. That way you can be here with us for that. But in the end, we're going to have all the week one slates covered for the return of college football. In case you cannot tell, I'm super excited about college football being back, super excited about this season. And this Friday slate is much different than the Thursday slate that we were given by DraftKings and FanDuel. On DraftKings, we have a 4-game slate of all FBS versus FBS opponents. There are some high-scoring matchups. There are some depth charts to talk about. There's just a lot going on, and we're going to break it down here for you and give you everything you need to know in order to build some successful DraftKings and FanDuel lineups for the Friday night slate. Now, if you have not already, make sure you subscribe to the channel on YouTube as well as subscribe to the audio. That way you can be with us for the rest of college football season. We're going to have weekly content for every DFS slate. And then we're also going to have our weekly scheduled golf and NFL content and then college basketball once that starts. So just make sure you're here for all that. Subscribe to the channel and be with us for the entirety of what should be a great fall on the sports calendar. All right, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the Friday. All right, so game number one on this slate is going to be Florida Atlantic taking on Michigan State. This one is not one of the higher scoring matchups of the night. It's projected to have a total of 47.5 points. Michigan State is currently 13.5 point favorites, meaning that the projected score of this one is about 30-17 in favor of the Spartans. And we have not gotten any depth charts from this game. For whatever reason, the Big 12 or the Big 10, is not requiring any depth charts for week one, which is really screwing over us DFS players because it's kind of nice to know who's starting when you play week one contests. But anyway, these two teams do have enough information out there on the internet that we can deduce a little bit about what's happening. So for FAU, they did have a transfer quarterback come in, Cam Fancher from Marshall. He appears in line to be the starter. He is a dual threat guy. So while this is not the best game environment, you can get a starting quarterback who has rushing upside at $6,000. If you're looking to spend up at some of the other positions, I do not mind him as a value play at the quarterback position. Now for FAU, running back is where it gets a little bit messy because you've got Zuberi Mobley, and CJ Campbell is the two top guys on DraftKings. And CJ Campbell is the one that has been getting the camp hype. But I know he's an FSU transfer, but I know very little about him other than that. Zuberi Mobley, I do believe played for FAU last season, but just very little information on these two guys, very little sample size, right? At the wide receiver spot, believe it or not, if you ever have used this site, RLads, which has depth charts for all Division I teams, it's crowdsourced. It's kind of like Wikipedia. They're right a lot of the time. I'm not going to say that they're right every time, and they don't do the or designations on depth charts. So occasionally there's some missteps on there. But RLads has George Johnson, who's a wide receiver on DraftKings, listed as the starting running back. So just don't really know what to make of this running situation for FAU. It's one that you can entirely avoid, though. We've got enough options on this slate. You don't have to play an FAU running back. Now, at the wide receiver spot for FAU, they do have a lot to replace. LaJohntay Wester, their wide receiver one for the last few seasons, has transferred to Colorado. He's in action tonight as I record this. And that leaves a lot of targets. He was one of the most targeted players in all of college football last year. So there's just a big gaping hole in terms of the targets. They're going to be up for grabs. And it appears that the three starting receivers are going to be Horton, Johnson, and Tucker. Very little known about all of them. Johnson played for Buffalo last season. Marlon Johnson, he's the most expensive one on DraftKings. Milan Tucker played at App State last year, played sparingly. And then I believe it's EJ Horton, played at West Virginia last year, used very sparingly as well. So it's three unproven commodities that project to start for them at the wide receiver position. We really don't even know if it's going to be them to start at the wide receiver position. So just a lot of unknowns with this FAU offense. If I'm going to play anybody, I think I can play Fancher unstacked because he is a mobile quarterback. He will get you that rushing yards, that rushing and potential rushing touchdowns. So he's a guy that can get you fantasy points without being stacked with one of his wide receivers. That might be the angle I would look at for this FAU offense. Now, on the Michigan State side, they have a brand new head coach, Jonathan Smith from Oregon State, and he brought over with him Aiden Childs, who was a prized recruit for Oregon State last year. And I think it says a little bit that he was at Oregon State, the coach was, and he decided to bring Childs with him to Michigan State and did not decide to bring DJ Uiagalelei with him, let DJ transfer to Florida State. Just interesting there. To me, it says something about what he thinks about Childs and Childs' potential development. But Childs was a backup at Oregon State last season. We know very little about what he would look like as a full-time starter. But this is a game where Michigan State's projected to score 30 points. He's $7,700 on DraftKings. He's got all the talent in the world. He's going out to the media and saying, hey, take the over. We're going to put up some points. So maybe it's worth a shot in the dark, in my opinion. At the running back spot, Nathan Carter should see most of the work. He was one of their better running backs last season. He was kind of their workhorse last season, if I'm being honest. Averaged over 15 attempts a game, which is pretty good in college football. The offense didn't have a lot of success, so he didn't have a whole lot of big games, especially in conference play. But to me, he's going to be the guy that you're going to want to look at in this backfield. The only kind of red flag is that they did acquire UMass transfer Kayron Lynch-Adams, who was even more of a workhorse back at UMass last year, averaging almost 20 carries per game. But that was at UMass. It was a different level of competition. I think that Carter should be the running back one, but I'm afraid that it's going to be a little bit of a committee. If Carter were cheaper, I would be all over him, and given this game environment, given the matchup, given what he's done in the past. But the presence of Lynch-Adams kind of throws a little bit of wrench in things, in my opinion. At the wide receiver spot, they've really got only one proven commodity at wide receiver, and that is Montorie Foster. He averaged almost 10 fantasy points a game last year. He was one of their leading receivers last year. He's the leading returning receiver this year. So to me, he would be the guy that you would want to take a look at. I would probably ignore most of the other ones. If you're just somebody who plays based off of vibes, Antonio Gates Jr., yes, that Antonio Gates Jr. Is an option at $4,300. I don't know if he's going to start or not. I would consider all positions at the wide receiver spot other than Montorie Foster's up for grabs. And you do have Jack Velling at tight end. He's a transfer from Oregon State as well, who transferred with the head coach and with the quarterback. And he was a really good tight end at Oregon State last season. 3 games over 18 fantasy points that were all in a row in the middle of the season. So this is a tight end that does carry some upside. He's going to be a mismatch in this passing game. I think that he's worth a look at $4,100 on DraftKings as well. All right, now before I continue with game number 2, I do want to mention there are places where you can get more information from me. First off, you can always follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm more than happy to answer any questions you may have. I tweet out the DFS rundown for every slate. If there's ever any kind of big news or anything that changes my opinions, I do generally tweet it out as well as any updates for the show. So make sure to follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. I'm also in the Fantasy Corner Discord. Link is in the description on YouTube as well as on the audio feed. Fantasy Corner Discord's got a lot of smart people that play DFS for a lot of different sports, and the college football chat in there has been jumping lately with a lot of really good advice, really good plays, like just a lot of people talking strategy, and it's really productive. We had some people in there win some money. So if you want people to talk DFS with, join the Fantasy Corner Discord. And then lastly, if you want to know who makes my lineups for every slate, or at least who makes my core plays, head on over to the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. I will profile my core plays for every single DFS slate, as well as the reason why. Now, I can't just sit here and guarantee that you're going to play those guys and instantly win thousands of dollars. That's not how it works. What I can guarantee you is that you can get the plays, get some advice, get some strategy, and some sound advice on why those plays are who they are, and help build your own process and help get you better at playing college football DFS, because this is a sport where you can still be legitimately profitable playing DFS. This is not a sport that has a lot of sims and a lot of optimizer guys playing it. So it's really what's the word I'm looking for? It's gettable for the average user, in my opinion. All right, now let's go ahead and dive into game number 2, Temple taking on Oklahoma. This one is it's going to be blowout city, if I'm being honest. So this one currently has Oklahoma as 43.5-point favorites. The total is 59.5 points, meaning the projected total is about 51-8 in favor of the Sooners. And for the Temple Owls, their depth chart is kind of a mess. They did release it, and they have 3 or guys at QB. Their starting quarterback is going to be Forrest Brock or Evan Simon or Tyler Douglas. Look, they're projected to score 8 points. We don't know if any one of these guys is going to get a full game to start. Pass. At the running back spot, Joquez Smith is listed as the starter. He's only 4,100 on DraftKings. He was one of the backs for Temple last year, so he has experience in this system. I don't think he's a terrible play at $4,100. Just know that he is the guy that according to the depth chart, he's the guy that you're going to want over Littleton. I would definitely if there's anybody in this offense I'm going to play, Joquez Smith is one of those guys. The other guy in this offense that I would be willing to play is Dante Wright. He's the only receiver that doesn't have an or designation. He was one of the best receivers for this Temple team last year. And really, no matter who's at quarterback, they're going to be smart to just throw it his way. So I think that Wright and Smith would probably be the only guys on this Temple side that I'm going to get to, and I'm probably just going to pass on everybody else. Now, on the Oklahoma side, the Jackson Arnold era starts officially. He did get to start in the bowl game against Arizona, scored 25 fantasy points. He is a gifted athlete. He's going to give you some rushing upside. So at $9,100, I know that this game is projected to be a blowout. But kind of similar to what we talked about on the Thursday slate and the Saturday slate, when a game is projected to be a blowout, you want guys with touchdown equity. You want guys who have a chance to get in the end zone in a myriad of ways, or in all likelihood, the guys that are going to get in the end zone, right? And Jackson Arnold, with a quarterback that can run as well as throw, he's just giving himself another dimension that can get him into the end zone. And so I generally prefer to play dual threat quarterbacks when games are expected to be blowouts because of that reason. So I think at $9,100, I think when you look at all the quarterbacks on the slate, I think he is clearly the top quarterback. Like, he's going to be the quarterback who is projected for the most points. He's going to be the quarterback who gets the most ownership. And I think he's a pretty solid play because of what he gives you in both the passing and the run game. Now, at the running back spot, Oklahoma did give us an or. Gavin Sawchuk was expected to be the starter. He was great over the second half of last season, ended the season with 4 or 5 games over 20 fantasy points. He really ended the season, once you got to the Oklahoma State game, as the workhorse running back after being used sparingly in the first half of the season. And they kind of, I don't want to say disrespected him, but by giving him the or with Javonte Barnes, we were really expecting this to be Sawchuk's backfield. But now we've got the or with Javonte Barnes, who was banged up a lot last season. Don't really know what to make of Barnes, but if both of these guys are going to be getting carries, I think they're both in play. If you were to fade Jackson Arnold, I would probably suggest getting one of these running backs. Look, this Oklahoma offense is going to score points. It's either going to be by Arnold and the guys through the air, or by one of those 2 running backs. Don't be surprised to see freshman Taylor Tatum get in on the action either. At only $3,300, to me, he's in play because of the blowout. Like, he's very clearly going to be the 3rd or 4th guy in, but he's very talented. They think very highly of him at Oklahoma. And, if he does get a few series because of the blowout, he could very easily pay off a 3.3K price tag. Now, at the wide receiver position, this is where it gets interesting. So Purdue transfer Deion Burks is listed as the starter, and he was a guy that just saw a lot of volume at Purdue last year. I think he can absolutely bring that volume to Oklahoma. He's quite speedy. He can break off big plays. I think he's a pretty solid option at $6,900. And I think when you look at the slate as a whole, I think he's the top wide receiver play, just being totally honest. Now, the other receivers for Oklahoma, I would personally rather play Burks than Farouk. To me, Farouk is not as much of a volume guy. He's more of a gadget play guy. I don't want to pay $6,500 for a guy of his profile. I'd rather just pay $400 more and get Deion Burks, a guy who can get target after target after target. Now, the downside is that those were the only 2 listed permanent starters. Nick Anderson, who was a really talented freshman for them last season, is listed as out for this game. He's not going to be available, but he wasn't listed as a starter anyway. Brendan Thompson was listed as the 3rd wide receiver. Look, if you're looking to really stack up the Oklahoma offense, I think that a double stack with Arnold, Burks, and Thompson is not a bad look. The tight end is also in play as well, Sharp. So this Oklahoma offense is definitely one that you can stack up. But like I said, I much prefer Burks to Farouk, and I think that Thompson and Sharp are decent salary savers. Game number 3 is going to be Western Michigan taking on Wisconsin. And this is an interesting one in terms of the line to me. The total is 56.5 points, which seems high. And Wisconsin's 24.5 point favorites. So the projected score is about 40-16 in favor of the Badgers. Western Michigan, I could not find a depth chart, but the good news is that they return most of their starting skill position offensive players. Hayden Wolf is their returning quarterback. And look, he was just okay last season. When he played Power 5 competition, it was hit or miss. He came in as a backup against Syracuse and only had 2 fantasy points, got the start against Mississippi State and had 21 fantasy points. And then in MAC play, it was just more hit or miss, right? To me, with this being a 24.5 point spread, I don't think this is blowout city like the Temple, Oklahoma game is. So if you think that Western Michigan might push Wisconsin a little bit, Hayden Wolf's in play at only $6,100. At the running back spot, Western Michigan does return their workhorse running back, Jalen Buckley. I think he's a pretty solid option. He really kind of last year, with the exception of the Iowa game, was pretty much game flow proof, game script proof. Only $5,000. I know Wisconsin's going to be a really tough defense for this Western Michigan team to score on, but he's very affordable. You know he's going to get a ton of carries. Not a bad option, in my opinion. At the wide receiver position, Womack is their most explosive player. He was the guy that had explosive games last year, 3 games over 25 fantasy points. Against Power 5 competition, he had 10 against Syracuse and 3 against Iowa. So, it's not a great profile, but this is a guy who can be a volume hog. He had games last year of 8, 12, 14, and 12 catches. So he's a guy that can really get a lot of volume. He's a guy that can break off big plays. Again, much like what I'm saying about the rest of this offense, if they're able to keep it close, $4,800 is a very reasonable price tag to get to him. And with it being only a 4-game slate, if you're looking at game stack this game, you can get a lot of guys from this Western Michigan side pretty cheap and pay up for some of the studs in the other games as well. Now, Sam Bucci is kind of their low average depth of target slot guy. He's going to start, honestly, and I don't know much about the other receivers on this Western Michigan team. Can't find much else about him, but Sam Bucci would clearly, to me, be the second option behind Womack in this Western Michigan passing attack. Now, on the Wisconsin side, we've got some knowns and some unknowns. So Tyler Van Dyke fits into both categories. He has started at Miami each of the last 2 seasons, and it's been kind of inconsistent, right? We know what we're going to get from him, and we know it's going to be inconsistent. He can have games where he's really good, throws for over 300 yards, throws for 5 touchdowns, and then have games where he can't hit the broadside of a barn and it's 150 passing yards. It's just, he has these peaks and valleys, right? But the good news is that he's going into the Phil Longo system. Phil Longo was the offensive coordinator at North Carolina when Sam Howell and Drake May were there. This is a very quarterback-friendly system. Now, I do think that they priced him up a little more than my liking, but this Wisconsin offense is projected to score 40 points. I think that a lot of people are going to click Jackson Arnold over Tyler Van Dyke. So, again, I'm hyping this game up as a potential game stack in DFS because I don't think anybody's going to do it, and I don't think that a lot of people are going to play Van Dyke with Arnold sitting $5,000 or $500 above. And this is a very quarterback-friendly system. This is the type of system that could revive Tyler Van Dyke's career. I'm kind of buying it for this game, and it's a short slate. We don't have a whole lot of options. I'm kind of buying in on him this slate, and we'll see where it takes us for the rest of the season because we know that the bad game's probably going to be coming with Tyler Van Dyke at some point sooner rather than later. Now, at the running back spot, Ches Malusi was the running back 2 last year behind Braylon Allen, but he was still a factor in the run game. He had double-digit carries in every game that he played, and he was pretty effective, averaging about 6 yards a carry on the season. And then he broke his leg and was out for the rest of the year. He's being priced like he's the workhorse running back. My one worry is that they do have Oklahoma transfer Tawee Walker, who was a former walk-on who really kind of was their best back at the start of last season before really ceding carries to Gavin Sawchuk as the year went on. And I worry that this is really going to be a committee. And it's $6,900 to $5,600. That's a lot to pay for committee backs, but this team is projected to score 40 points. So again, kind of like what I said about Arnold, if you're not going to be playing Van Dyke, I think it's pretty wise to get a piece of one of these two. Now at the wide receiver spot, this is probably my favorite position to target for the Wisconsin guys. Will Pauling is going to be in my lineups in or out of a game stack, in or out of a stack with Tyler Van Dyke. I think he's just straight up mispriced at $5,200. Last season, he was a volume machine for this Wisconsin offense. Pretty much since the Rutgers game, he was in double-digit fantasy points every game except one. In that one game, he had 9.9 fantasy points, and he was over 15 fantasy points in more than half of those games, capped off with the big 37 fantasy point performance against LSU. Look, this guy commands a lot of targets. He's going to get targeted in all areas of the field. He is their wide receiver 1, $5,200. I'm not going to lie to y'all. I think that currently Will Pauling is probably the best points per dollar play on the slate. I think that he should be priced up there near Burks and Manor and guys like that, and he's just not. So I think that he's going to be a really good play. I think he's going to be really popular, but I think you can play him in or out of a stack, whether it be with the game stack or quarterback stack. I think he is the guy that you can get to in this game as a one-off play. Now, if you're looking to pivot off of Pauling, that was fun to say. If you're looking to pivot off of Pauling, Bryson Green would be the guy. He was kind of their second best wide receiver down the stretch last season. Kamir Deke kind of faded as the year went on. And so Bryson Green kind of was that wide receiver 2 behind Pauling. I expected it to be kind of similar in terms of a role this year. But look, if everybody's going to be playing Pauling and nobody's going to be playing Green, then it might be worth it to play Green for leverage in some of your lineups. I'm not saying you should do that in all of them because I think that Pauling is a smash play. But I think that in DFS, sometimes that playing a guy for leverage is a good decision. And so Green is going to be leverage off of Pauling. I think you can even, if you wanted to double stack him with Tyler Van Dyke, I think that would be a good strategy as well. But these two guys are going to be the guys to look out for in this Wisconsin passing attack. All right, let's take a quick breather and then let's talk about the last game of the night. Reminder, if this video has helped you in any way, please hit the like button on YouTube. Please rate and review the audio as well. It helps me out a ton when you guys do that. It helps just kind of spread the word around and get the podcast noticed, helps grow the community. And I promise that you guys doing just that little thing helps me more than you could ever know. So if these help you out, please hit the like button. Please rate and review. I really do appreciate it. It cannot be stressed enough. All right, let's go ahead and dive into the last game of the night, which is probably the most stackable game of the night. That is going to be TCU heading to the farm to take on Stanford. TCU is currently 9.5-point favorites in this game with a total of 60.5. I'm going to be honest, that's a little bit of an interesting line to me. I would have thought that the spread would have been closer, but clearly the books are not respecting Stanford, giving a lot of respect to TCU. And so the projected total in this game ends up being about 35-25 in favor of TCU. This is the only game of the night where both teams are projected to be above 20 points. So this is going to be probably the most genuinely stackable game on the night, right? Now, TCU, they did give us a depth chart, and it's going to be Josh Hoover starting at quarterback. He started the back half of last season and was pretty good once he got the starting gig. Really in week 6 was kind of when he took over the job. He came in relief, and then his first official start was in week 7. But in that stretch, you saw 3 games over 30 fantasy points, so clearly he has a high ceiling. This Stanford pass defense got lit up week after week after week last year, and so I really think this is a pretty good spot for Josh Hoover. If the blowout concerns you with playing Jackson Arnold, if Tyler Van Dyke being Tyler Van Dyke scares you, then Josh Hoover should be your guy on this slate, in my opinion. I think that in terms of the top quarterback options, he is probably the safest of the 3 of them, in my opinion. Now, at the running back spot, we've got Cam Cook listed as the starter. He apparently has a, quote, a little bit of a hamstring issue from what I could find online and what DraftKings put in his bio, but I think he's going to be good to go. And so if he's good to go, then he's going to be the starting running back. And last year, Amani Bailey was not – okay, so I try to refrain from just totally bashing players on these because they're college kids. They don't deserve that. And, I try to be as objective as possible. Amani Bailey was not a great running back. He didn't break a lot of tackles, but he got a big workload and he had a lot of big fantasy days, right? And so Cam Cook, if Cam Cook is actually good at football, then Cam Cook can put up a ton of fantasy points. And he's at a salary of only $5,200. I would be shocked if he did not play. If he did not play, then Trey Sanders would probably be the guy. He was the backup running back last season. So those 2 guys would be the really only 2 that I'm concerned about. But Cam Cook is definitely the guy that I'm interested in. He's a guy that I drafted on a few best ball teams on Underdog on the offseason because I feel like whoever takes a hold of this workhorse running back role for TCU is going to be in line for a ton of fantasy points, right? We saw it with Kendrick Miller a few years back, with Amani Bailey last year, and Cam Cook this year could absolutely significantly outplay that price tag of $5,200 if he is the workhorse running back. Now, at the wide receiver spot, TCU threw us a bit of a curveball because Eric McAllister was by far the best receiver for Boise State last year. When he I can't remember if he just got injured or if he just decided that he was transferring, but when he quit playing in that Boise offense, they all of a sudden could not throw the ball. They basically targeted no wide receivers. He was really good for them. And he's listed as a backup in this game, which was surprising. He was supposed to be the wide receiver 1 for this team. So just because he's listed as the backup, if you're truly a believer in his talent, $4,400 is a small price to pay for him, in my opinion. But you don't have to play a guy who's listed as a backup, in my opinion. So the guy that I would be looking to be their wide receiver 1 if McAllister is a backup would be Savion Williams. He's really big, really athletic, and he really shined down the stretch when Hoover was the quarterback last year. We mentioned how Hoover started in the BYU game. Well, after that, Savion Williams had a 20 fantasy point outing against BYU, 37 against Texas. The other 3 were just okay, but clearly he has a little bit of rapport with Josh Hoover. This would be the wide receiver that I would want to stack with. And then after that, in terms of the starters on their depth chart, in the slot role, it's going to be J.P. Richardson or Jack Beck. I think Richardson's the better player personally. And then out wide, Dylan Wright is starting. He's the one that's starting over Eric McAllister. So there comes a little bit of risk with playing Wright that you'd think he's going to hold off McAllister. So again, Williams will be the guy that I would prefer to target the most, probably followed by JP Richardson. And then if you're playing enough lineups, you can take some shots at the other guys like Wright, Beck, and McAllister. Drake Dabney is going to be the starting tight end. He is coming over from Baylor. He got a decent amount of work at Baylor. He's only $3,900. I don't think he's a bad option. Next up, let's talk about the Stanford side. So Stanford really threw us a curveball on the depth chart. It really irritated me. 3 quarterbacks got the or designation to start. Returning starter Ashton Daniels, Justin Lamson, and Elijah Brown. 3 of them get the or designation. If 3 quarterbacks are going to take snaps, it just begs the question as to whether any of them are playable. I thought Daniels was going to be the starter. I really did, because he was okay down the stretch last year. He had a few big games, a few duds, but he's mobile. He can run. He can kind of just energize your offense a little bit. I thought he was going to be the starter, but he's listed as a co-starter. It gives me serious concerns over playing him. I feel like all 3 are going to play snaps, but I feel like Daniels is eventually going to win the job. So maybe he's a fade for this Friday night, but hopefully we can get him at a down price tag somewhere down the road. But I do expect Daniels to be the starter sooner rather than later. Now, at the running back spot, we got another or, and it was Cedric Irvin or Micah Ford. Here's why that's interesting. Micah Ford is at the minimum price. So even if Micah Ford is clearly the second running back behind Cedric Irvin, if he's going to be getting carries and he's at $3,000, he's a value play that you need to be on the lookout for. Cedric Irvin is the guy that everybody thought was going to be the starter. Not necessarily because of anything he did last year, but just because of his pedigree, because what everybody saw at spring and summer practice. But if it's Irvin or Ford, I think you got to have a little bit of interest in playing both of them. Remember, Stanford is implied to score 25 points. And if the quarterback is totally out of the play, then we hope that one of the running backs can go off, right? At the wide receiver spot, there's only one wide receiver who did not get an or designation. Tiger Bachmeier was a freshman last year. He got the or designation. He was listed as an or with Isaiah Cisse, who is very cheaply priced at $3,000. Ismail Cisse, not Isaiah. I just assumed when it was Cisse, it was Isaiah. My bad. And then you also had Harris or Mosley as the other starting wide receiver. Both those two are like priced in 4K though. I'm not interested in either of them. The guy that didn't get the or designation is their alpha wide receiver, Alec Ayamanor. He's another guy that I drafted a lot in best ball drafts this offseason on Underdog. He's a physical presence that is a great athlete, and he can turn being not open into a touchdown. If no matter who's playing quarterback, throwing it up to Ayamanor is going to be their best friend. He had some huge games last year, including that overtime game against Colorado where he had 63 fantasy points, one of the biggest performances of the season. And so Ayamanor, to me, is the guy in this receiving core. If you're looking to game stack this game, but playing the quarterbacks of Stanford scares you, you can go Hoover, TCU wide receiver, Stanford running back, Ayamanor, and get 4 guys from this game very easily like that. I think no matter who's at quarterback, they're going to be throwing to Alec Ayamanor. And then lastly, Sam Roush is going to play tight end. Look, we know Stanford is one of those teams that they just churn out tight ends, right? Like Stanford and Notre Dame seem to be the 2 schools that always have a good tight end. So $3,600, willing to take a few shots at them on GPPs for sure. All right, but that's going to do it for this episode here, guys. So like I said, hopefully we gave you guys all the information you need to build some winning DFS lineups for this Friday night slate. If you are interested in getting more from me, remember you can follow me on Twitter at Mike's Money Picks. You can join the Fantasy Corner Discord and get in on that discussion. You can also get the full core plays on the Patreon, patreon.com/Mike's Money Picks. And also with it being a new season, if you're looking to try something new, we're partnered with Sign Up Expert, and what they do is they give the best promo codes for new users on any DFS player prop and sportsbook site, and they even sync to your location to show you exactly what's legal in your state. So head on over to signupexpert.com/Mike's Picks if you're looking to try something new. But all right, y'all, that's going to do it for this Friday night episode. Remember, check out the Saturday episode. I released it already for the main slate, but we're going to be back tomorrow night talking about the night slate. So make sure you're subscribed to the channel so that we can be with us for that episode, as well as the rest of our weekly college football content going down the rest of the season. Like I said, hopefully I was able to help you guys this episode. Thank you guys for watching and listening to this point, and I will see you guys next time.